Crude, jagged letters screamed from the pristine white surface of their garage door, a visceral slash of violent, pulsating crimson against the carefully chosen HOA-approved beige of their house in Serene Meadows Estates. FREAK. The single brutal word, scrawled in thick, dripping spray paint, was positioned with chilling precision directly beneath the window of their 10-year-old son, Daniel's bedroom. Olivia Marcus Thorne's wife made a choked, horrified sound, a strangled gasp that tore through the quiet Saturday morning. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief that rapidly morphed into a ferocious, maternal fury. Marcus felt a cold, sickening lurch in his own stomach, a primal wave of rage and protective instinct cresting violently within him, so potent it left him momentarily breathless. But it was Daniel's reaction that shattered the morning's deceptive tranquility into a million jagged, piercing pieces. He had come out onto the driveway a little unsteady, but determined to retrieve the morning paper, his movement still marked by the subtle uncoordination stemming from the cerebral palsy that affected his left side. His face, usually bright with the innocent anticipation of a Saturday free from school, was alight. Then he saw it. He froze, his slight frame, which always seemed to carry an invisible weight of resilience, suddenly trembling uncontrollably. His eyes, usually so full of a gentle, curious light, a window to his kind soul fixed on the hateful epithet. A small, wounded animal sound escaped his lips, a sound of pure, uncomprehending pain that tore through Marcus like a physical blow, lodging like a shard of glass in his heart. Who would do that? Olivia whispered, her voice shaking raw with anguish as she rushed to Daniel, enveloping him in a fierce, protective hug, trying to shield his eyes, his very being, from the vile assault on their home, on their child. Why him? Her questions hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. Marcus didn't answer immediately. His mind, usually a calm, analytical instrument, was a chaotic whirl of shock and a blinding, almost incapacitating rage. He wanted to smash something, to hunt down whoever had dared to inflict this wound on his son. He forced himself to take a deep, shuddering breath, then another. He looked at the hideous word again. His gaze swept the quiet, tree-lined street. Their neighbors' houses stood silent, curtains drawn, betraying nothing. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if it was random, some bored teenagers. But the placement directly under Daniel's window felt too deliberate, too targeted. His thoughts, unbidden, drifted to Ms. Evelyn Rothschild, the grande dame of the Serene Meadows Homeowners Association, a woman whose pronouncements on maintaining neighborhood character and upholding aesthetic standards were often thinly veiled attacks on anyone or anything that deviated from her narrow, intolerant, and frankly suffocating vision of perfection. Daniel, with his visible disability and the occasional piece of brightly colored adaptive equipment that sometimes found its way into their yard, his therapeutic tricycle, his specially designed walker, had Marcus suspected long been a silent, unwelcome affront to Ms. Rothschild's meticulously ordered, rigidly controlled world. This was a monstrous, unthinkable escalation. This wasn't one of her usual passive-aggressive notes about lawn height or an unapproved garden gnome. This was a direct, personal, and deeply hateful attack designed to wound, to terrorize. Marcus Thorne was a father, and his primary, overwhelming instinct was to protect his vulnerable son, to shield him from the ugliness of the world. But he was also a man who understood the mechanics of hate. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, despite his burning anger, that this was more than just vandalism. This was a message. He had to report this to the police, of course. He'd call the local precinct. He also knew he'd have to inform the HOA, a prospect that filled him with weary dread. Ms. Evelyn Rothschild, if she was indeed responsible, or even if she merely approved of such an act, had no earthly idea the hornet's nest she might have just kicked. For now, though, he was just a father, his heart breaking for his son. Their move to Serene Meadows Estates 3 years prior had been a carefully considered choice, a decision made with Daniel's future at its core. The district's public school system was highly regarded, offering an excellent integrated program for children with physical disabilities like Daniel's. They had sought a peaceful, supportive community where Daniel could thrive, where his differences would be met with understanding and acceptance, not scorn and prejudice. The neighborhood, with its deceptively pleasant tree-lined streets, its obsessively manicured lawns, and its glossy brochures promising serenity and security, had seemed on the surface to fit the bill. Daniel, a bright, intensely sensitive, and remarkably resilient boy, loved art music and possessed a gentle, empathetic spirit that usually charmed everyone he met. Everyone, it seemed, except perhaps a select few in Serene Meadows. Ms. Evelyn Rothschild, a woman whose considerable family wealth and long-standing residency in the most opulent house in the development had cemented her position as the unassailable and often unhinged matriarch of the Serene Meadows HOA, had made her disapproval of the Thorns, and particularly of Daniel, known through a series of escalating microaggressions and increasingly overt acts of hostility. It had started subtly, almost deniably pointed comments at HOA meetings about the critical importance of maintaining a uniform and uncluttered visual appearance throughout the community, delivered while her gaze flickered pointedly towards the Thorns whenever Daniel's brightly colored therapeutic tricycle was temporarily parked on their driveway between therapy sessions. Then came the passive-aggressive, unsigned notes left in their mailbox regarding the appropriateness and aesthetic impact of the small, gently sloping wooden ramp Marcus had installed leading to their front porch, a ramp that was absolutely essential for Daniel's independence and safety. More recently, her complaints had become more direct, more brazen. She had formally cited them for unapproved structural modifications when they had installed specialized unobtrusive grab bars near Daniel's bedroom window to aid his mobility and prevent falls. She had, even in a move that stunned them with its cruelty, attempted to have the HOA board ban Daniel's beloved therapy dog, a gentle, impeccably behaved golden retriever named Max, from the community park, claiming without a shred of evidence that Max constituted a potential sanitary risk and an insurance liability, despite Max being a fully certified assistance animal with all necessary documentation. Each of these incidents had been met with firm but polite resistance from Marcus and Olivia, who had meticulously documented every interaction, every baseless complaint, every veiled threat, compiling a file that was growing disturbingly thick. They had, until now, chosen to handle Ms. Rothschild's escalating animosity through official HOA channels and quiet, reasoned diplomacy, desperately hoping to avoid escalating the conflict and further distressing Daniel, who was acutely aware of the tension. This act of hateful vandalism, however, had shattered any lingering illusion that Ms. Rothschild's prejudice could be contained, reasoned with, or ignored. This was a declaration of war. That morning, after the initial shock had begun to subside, and Daniel, though deeply shaken and now refusing to go near his own bedroom window, had been coaxed inside and comforted by Olivia, Marcus felt a cold calm descend. He took out his personal cell phone, not his work-issued one, and meticulously photographed the graffiti from every conceivable angle, documenting its position relative to Daniel's window, the house, the street. He noted the specific color of the spray paint, a garish, almost fluorescent crimson, the crude style of the block, lettering the apparent height and reach of the vandal, and the presence of any overspray drips or other trace evidence. He instructed Olivia not to attempt to clean it yet, as much as the sight of it seared their eyes. It was a crime scene. He would call the local police precinct and file a report as a private citizen, the victimized homeowner, to avoid any immediate appearance of a conflict of interest or undue influence. The hate crime aspect, however, was undeniable and deeply unsettling. The word freak, scrawled directly beneath his disabled son's window, was not random teenage mischief. It was a targeted message of hate, venomous and vile. He also knew he had to inform the HOA. Their bylaws required immediate reporting of any vandalism. He dreaded the thought of facing Ms. Rothschild, but it was a necessary step. Maybe, just maybe, this act would be so egregious that even she and her coterie of sycophantic board members would be shocked into some semblance of human decency. The first shocking incident in the rising action of this ugly drama unfolded later that day when Marcus, as required, reported the vandalism to the Serene Meadows HOA board via email, attaching his photographs concurrently with having filed an official police report with the local precinct. An emergency board meeting was called for that evening, ostensibly to address the serious security incident. The HOA's response, orchestrated undoubtedly by Ms. Rothschild, who, despite the glaringly obvious conflict of interest, refused to recuse herself from the discussion, was appallingly dismissive and deeply insulting. At the meeting held in the sterile community clubhouse, Ms. Rothschild, exuding an air of forced solemnity that barely concealed her usual imperious disdain, downplayed the severity of the act. "I am While any act of vandalism is of course regrettable and most unwelcome in our peaceful community, she intoned her voice, dripping with a false sympathy that made Marcus's skin crawl. We must be careful not to overreact or jump to inflammatory conclusions. Her gaze swept the room, lingering on Marcus. This was likely the work of mischievous teenagers, perhaps from outside our community, bored and looking for some misguided trouble. To label it a hate crime, as Mr. Thorne seems so eager to do in his police report, is perhaps an exaggeration, an unfortunate attempt to draw undue attention and unnecessary alarm. Then, with breathtaking audacity, she had the gall to suggest that the Thornes themselves might have inadvertently invited such an incident. When a property deviates significantly from established community aesthetic norms, she mused, her eyes flicking disdainfully towards Marcus, who sat stone-faced beside Olivia. When there are, shall we say, unusual fixtures or activities that draw curious or perhaps unwelcome attention, it can sometimes regrettably make that property a target for such antisocial behavior. Perhaps a more discreet approach to certain family matters might be advisable in the future to prevent similar unfortunate occurrences. The implication was sickeningly clear. Daniel's disability and the Thornes' refusal to hide him or his needs away was somehow to blame for this act of hate. Another board member, a nervous man named Peterson, who always deferred to Rothschild, chimed in, "Indeed, Evelyn, we've had complaints before about clutter. Perhaps this is a sign that more stringent adherence to bylaws is needed from all residents." The HOA offered no meaningful support, no genuine condemnation of the hateful message, only a vague promise to review community security patrols and a thinly veiled victim-blaming admonishment to the Thornes. Marcus felt Olivia tremble with suppressed rage beside him. He put a calming hand on her arm, though his own anger was a living thing inside him. Several other residents murmured, some looking uncomfortable, others nodding in agreement with Rothschild. One neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a gruff, elderly veteran who lived across the street and was known for his short temper and dislike of children's noise, muttered audibly, "Some folks just ask for trouble." Another resident, Mrs. Davies, known for her gossipy nature, whispered to her companion, "I did see that troubled Miller boy, the one who likes to draw on things, lurking around yesterday evening. He's always up to no good." Marcus felt a flicker of something. The Miller boy, Jake, was a teenager known for some minor graffiti tagging on park benches, usually just his initials. And Henderson had a shed full of old paint cans. Could it be one of them? Or was Rothschild deflecting? The second shocking incident, which demonstrated Ms. Rothschild's brazen attempts to obstruct any meaningful investigation and to further intimidate the Thorne family, occurred the very next morning. Marcus, rising before dawn, discovered that someone had made a clumsy, hurried attempt to scrub away a portion of the graffiti on their garage door with what smelled like a harsh chemical solvent. The paint was smeared, the lettering partially obscured, but the hateful word was still legible. More importantly, this act of tampering could have potentially destroyed valuable forensic evidence. Fortunately, Marcus had already taken extensive, high-resolution photographs and had carefully, discreetly collected minute paint samples from the initial untouched vandalism, bagging and tagging them with the precision of long habit before the local police had even arrived the previous day. He had a strong, sickening suspicion that Ms. Rothschild herself or someone acting on her explicit behalf had made this amateurish attempt at a cover-up. Later that day, as if to confirm his suspicions about an organized campaign of intimidation, an anonymous typed note appeared in their mailbox, printed on cheap paper. Some people should learn to keep their family problems to themselves if they know what's good for them and their special boy. This neighborhood values peace and quiet. Don't make waves. This is your only warning. The threat was unambiguous, a clear attempt to silence them, to make them afraid to pursue justice for the hateful attack on their son and their home. Olivia was distraught. "Marcus, what are we going to do? This is terrifying." "We're not going to back down," Marcus said, his voice tight with a cold fury. "They want us to be scared. They want us to hide. We won't. Shall." It was then that Marcus Thorne, after a sleepless night wrestling with his conscience and his paternal rage, made a difficult decision. The local precinct, while sympathetic, seemed to be treating the case as routine vandalism, hampered by the tampered evidence and lack of immediate leads. The hate crime aspect so clear to him felt secondary to them. He realized that if true justice was to be found, he might have to gently and very discreetly guide the investigation using the resources and expertise he possessed, but rarely, if ever, brought into his personal life. He was Captain Marcus Thorne, chief of the Metropolitan Police Department's specialized Graffiti Crimes Division, an expert in tracking the most elusive vandals, analyzing paints and tagging styles, and building ironclad cases against those who used public and private property as canvases for their hate. He would not directly investigate, that would be unethical, but he could ensure the right questions were asked, the right forensic avenues pursued by the assigned detectives. He initiated a discreet consultation with the lead detective on the case from the local precinct, Detective Miller, no relation to the Miller boy mentioned earlier, sharing his specialized knowledge about graffiti analysis and paint forensics. He emphasized the targeted nature of the slur freak against his disabled son, strongly suggesting the hate crime enhancement. Miller, an experienced but overworked detective, was initially skeptical of a police captain getting involved in his own case, but Marcus's calm professionalism and deep knowledge of this specific type of crime soon won his respect. The crimson spray paint, Marcus explained to Miller, is a specific, somewhat uncommon brand and shade. It's not the cheap stuff you find at any hardware store. The style of the lettering, even in its crudeness, the way the R is formed the aggressive downward slash of the K, it's not typical teenage tagging. This feels older, more deliberate, more hateful. Marcus also subtly nudged Miller to look into any available security footage from neighbors. Mrs. Davies, despite her gossip, had a new security camera system. When approached by Detective Miller, she eagerly provided the footage. It showed a figure late at night, dressed in dark clothing, a hoodie pulled up, and a baseball cap obscuring their face, walking purposefully towards the Thornes' house, then away again a few minutes later. The figure was of medium height, their build indeterminate under the baggy clothes. Male, female, impossible to tell. A dead end, it seemed. Another line of inquiry that Marcus suggested Miller pursue was the online marketplace. Sometimes, Marcus said, especially with rarer paints, people buy them for one project and then try to sell the leftovers online. Miller's team spent days scouring local classifieds and marketplace sites. They found a listing for 2 cans of the exact brand and shade of crimson spray paint sold just a week before the incident by an anonymous account, Red-Handed 23, with a cash-only public meetup transaction. The seller's account was a new burner untraceable, another frustrating dead end, but it confirmed the paint was recently acquired. The midpoint twist in the investigation, the one that began to pull focus, came from Marcus's own division's resources, to which Detective Miller, now fully on board, had officially requested assistance. One of Marcus's top analysts in the Graffiti Crimes Lab, Dr. Anya Sharma, examining the paint samples Marcus had meticulously collected before the tampering identified a rare binding agent and a specific pigment combination used in that particular crimson spray paint. This isn't just uncommon, Captain Dr. Sharma had reported. This batch with this precise chemical signature was part of a limited run by a boutique art supply company, Artisan Hues. Because in Delft, they only distribute through a very small number of specialty retailers in the region, mostly high-end art shops. Marcus, providing this information to Detective Miller, felt a surge of adrenaline. Miller assigned 2 of his detectives to visit each of these retailers armed with a photo of the graffiti and inquiries about recent sales of that specific paint. At the 3rd store, they visited Canvas and Clay, a small independent art shop in a neighboring affluent suburb, the owner a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Albright, with a remarkable memory for her regular clientele, recognized the distinctive crimson. "Oh, that dreadful aggressive color," she'd said, wrinkling her nose. "Yes, a woman bought 2 cans of it just last week, an older lady, very particular in her demeanor, impeccably dressed. Drove a large, dark blue luxury sedan, a Lexus, I think. Paid in cash, which I found a little odd for such a small purchase. She said she needed it for a community art project that required a very vibrant, attention-grabbing red. She also asked about solvents, good ones for removing paint from various surfaces. The description of the woman, her vehicle, and her imperious air matched Ms. Evelyn Rothschild perfectly. The community art project was, Marcus now knew with a chilling, sickening certainty, the hateful defacement of his own home. The even more significant twist, the discovery that cemented Ms. Rothschild's motive beyond mere aesthetic fascism and her propensity for such malicious targeted acts, emerged when Detective Miller, acting on Marcus's strong suggestion to explore Ms. Rothschild's past, ran a comprehensive authorized background check. This wasn't just about this one incident anymore. It was about establishing a pattern. Miller's team uncovered a sealed settlement from a civil lawsuit filed against her 10 years prior in a different state by a family who had alleged a protracted campaign of harassment and intimidation by Ms. Rothschild after they had installed a wheelchair ramp for their disabled daughter at their previous home, a home also governed by an HOA, where Ms. Rothschild had been a powerful, dictatorial board member. The allegations detailed in that sealed settlement, which Miller's team successfully petitioned the court to unseal, given the current investigation, bore an eerie, chilling resemblance to the tactics she had employed against the Thorns: anonymous threatening notes, baseless complaints to the HOA, attempts to turn neighbors against the family, and a final unproven but strongly suspected act of vandalism involving discriminatory slurs spray-painted on the family's property. That case had been settled out of court, with a hefty payout from Rothschild and a strict non-disclosure agreement, effectively burying her history of hate-motivated harassment until now. This established a clear, undeniable, and deeply disturbing pattern of her targeting families, with disabled members using her HOA power as a weapon, and when that failed to achieve her aims, resorting to acts of vandalism and intimidation to drive them out or silence them. She was not just an intolerant neighborhood bully. She was a serial perpetrator of hate-motivated acts, a predator cloaked in civic respectability. Armed with this irrefutable chain of evidence, the forensic paint match, the art store owner's positive identification, the details of the prior sealed civil settlement, demonstrating a clear modus operandi, Detective Miller, in consultation with Marcus, who was now officially an advisor on the case due to its hate crime classification, and his division's expertise, knew they had an airtight case. Miller presented the comprehensive findings to the district attorney's office, formally requesting that the charges against Ms. Rothschild for the vandalism of the Thorns home be upgraded to include a hate crime enhancement, a specification that would carry far more severe penalties and reflect the true nature of her offense. The DA, reviewing the compelling evidence of her pattern of behavior and the clear, vicious targeting of a disabled child, readily agreed. An arrest warrant was issued for Ms. Evelyn Rothschild for felony malicious vandalism with a hate crime specification. The climax of this painful chapter was meticulously and perhaps poetically orchestrated by Detective Miller to occur at the next scheduled Serene Meadows Estates HOA monthly meeting. Ms. Rothschild, blissfully unaware of the net that was closing tightly around her, had with her usual arrogance placed an item on the agenda herself. A discussion on maintaining community harmony and addressing disruptive influences detrimental to property values. It was, Marcus knew, her thinly veiled attempt to further ostracize his family and to rally support for even stricter enforcement of her discriminatory aesthetic standards, likely paving the way for more fines or even forced compliance actions. She clearly felt untouchable, supremely confident that her clumsy attempt to destroy the evidence on the garage door had succeeded. As Ms. Rothschild, dressed in an expensive Chanel suit, stood at the podium in the community clubhouse in her usual imperious fashion and began to pontificate about the unfortunate but pressing necessity of ensuring that all residents diligently adhere to the established norms that protect our shared property values and our uniquely serene way of life, and started to make thinly veiled, pointed allusions to certain households that seem unwilling or constitutionally unable to conform to reasonable community expectations. Marcus Thorne rose slowly from his seat in the audience. The room filled with the usual mix of Rothschild supporters, intimidated fence-sitters, and a few quiet dissenters fell into an expectant hush. Ms. Rothschild. Marcus began his voice, calm, measured, but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority that silenced her mid-sentence, her perfectly lipsticked mouth falling slightly ajar. Before you continue your rather predictable discourse on community harmony, I believe there is a far more pressing and indeed criminal matter that requires the immediate attention of this board and our entire community. And that is the matter of the cowardly hate crime that was recently perpetrated against my 10-year-old son Daniel and my family. Ms. Rothschild's face tightened, her eyes, usually so cold and assessing, flickered with something unreadable, anger, annoyance. Or was it a glint of genuine fear? Mr. Thorne. She began, her voice regaining its sharp, condescending edge. As I believe this board has already clearly communicated to you, that unfortunate incident of juvenile delinquency is being handled by the proper authorities. This is hardly the appropriate venue or time to rehash your personal grievances or your, frankly, unsubstantiated and overly emotional accusations. My accusations are far from unsubstantiated, Ms. Rothschild. Marcus stated, his gaze unwavering, locking onto hers. In fact, they are supported by incontrovertible forensic evidence, by direct witness testimony, and by a documented history of your engaging in strikingly similar acts of hate-motivated harassment and vandalism against other families with disabled members in other communities. He then proceeded with the dispassionate, meticulous precision of a seasoned investigator laying out an irrefutable case to detail the entire chain of evidence against her, the rare crimson paint, forensically matched and traced directly to her cash purchase, the art store owner's positive identification of her and her vehicle, the chilling details of her prior sealed civil settlement for identical behavior in another state. He spoke not as a grieving, angry father, though those emotions still simmered beneath the surface, but as an officer of the law presenting a meticulously constructed, undeniable edifice of her guilt. With each damning piece of evidence, he revealed Ms. Rothschild's carefully composed facade of civic virtue and imperious authority began to visibly crumble. Her face drained of color, becoming a mask of shocked disbelief, then dawning horror. Her hands clenched tightly on the podium before her, her attempts to interrupt with indignant denials and blustering threats. "This is slander. I'll sue you. I'll sue everyone," growing weaker, more desperate, more shrill. "And so, Ms. Rothschild," Marcus concluded, his voice now ringing with the undeniable authority of his office, an authority that transcended this small, petty kingdom she had ruled for so long. "It is not primarily as Daniel Thorne's father that I address you now, but as Captain Marcus Thorne, Chief of the Metropolitan Police Department's Graffiti Crimes Division, the division responsible for investigating and bringing to justice those who perpetrate acts of vandalism, particularly those heinous acts motivated by hate." He held up his official police badge, its gold shield catching the overhead lights, a potent symbol of the justice that was at long last about to be served. "Miss Evelyn Rothschild, pursuant to a warrant issued by the Superior Court of this county, based upon the overwhelming evidence compiled by the Metropolitan Police Department, you are under arrest for felony malicious vandalism, with the special circumstance allegation of committing a hate crime." As he spoke those final words, a collective gasp went through the room. Ms. Rothschild's eyes darted wildly around, like a trapped animal. Suddenly, with a strangled cry of rage and panic, she grabbed a heavy water pitcher from the podium and hurled it towards Marcus. He sidestepped it easily as it shattered on the floor. Then she whirled, spotting her oversized designer handbag on a chair behind the podium. She lunged for it, fumbling inside. For a horrifying second, Marcus thought she might have a weapon. Instead, she pulled out a can of spray paint, crimson red, and with a wild shriek, aimed it at Marcus's face. "Stay away from me," she screamed. Before she could depress the nozzle, two uniformed police officers who had been discreetly positioned by Detective Miller at the rear of the community hall moved forward with astonishing speed and quiet, professional efficiency. One officer deflected her arm, the spray going harmlessly into the air, while the other swiftly subdued her. Ms. Rothschild thrashed and kicked her expensive suit, becoming disheveled, her carefully coiffed hair falling into her eyes, screaming obscenities and threats. "You'll all pay for this. I have connections. This is a mistake, a terrible mistake." The assembled residents of Serene Meadows Estates, many of whom had either passively tolerated, actively enabled, or secretly feared Ms. Rothschild's reign of intolerance for years, watched in stunned, horrified silence as their once untouchable HOA queen was expertly handcuffed, read her Miranda rights, and ignominiously escorted from the premises, her hateful reign brought to a sudden, dramatic, and entirely fitting end. The lingering scent of crimson spray paint in the air was a bitter, ironic perfume to her downfall. The immediate aftermath of Ms. Evelyn Rothschild's arrest at the HOA meeting was a maelstrom of shocked disbelief and a slowly dawning shamefaced realization for many residents of Serene Meadows Estates. The public unmasking of their HOA's most powerful and feared figure, not merely as a neighborhood bully, but as a vindictive perpetrator of a hate crime against a disabled child, forced the community to engage in a painful but necessary self-examination. They had to confront the insidious undercurrent of prejudice and intolerance that had been allowed to fester largely unchecked beneath its placid, serene surface for far too long. As Ms. Rothschild was processed through the legal system, her bail set extraordinarily high due to the hate crime specification, her flight risk, she had indeed been fumbling for car keys in her bag as well, and her documented history of similar alleged offenses. The Serene Meadows HOA board, stripped of its tyrannical leader and facing a tidal wave of resident outrage and no-confidence votes, dissolved in disgrace. An interim committee composed of individuals genuinely committed to fostering an inclusive, transparent, and respectful community, including to everyone's surprise the formerly gruff Mr. Henderson, who mumbled something about "no damn Nazi tactics in my neighborhood," was quickly appointed by a majority vote of homeowners. Their clear mandate was to overhaul the HOA's voluminous and often discriminatory bylaws, reform its leadership structure, and most importantly, to detoxify its poisonous culture. For the Thorne family, the arrest brought a complex cascade of emotions and immense bone-deep relief that Ms. Rothschild's campaign of terror was finally over, a grim satisfaction that justice was being pursued through the proper channels, but also a lingering, profound sorrow for the pain, fear, and violation their son Daniel had endured. The hateful crimson slur was professionally removed from their garage door the very next day, not by a shamefaced and now defunct HOA, but by a volunteer crew of Marcus's colleagues from the Graffiti Crimes Division. They then, with Daniel's shy but delighted input, helped him design and paint a vibrant, joyful mural in its place. A swirling galaxy of planet stars and friendly aliens, a defiant symbol of hope, imagination, and resilience, triumphing over targeted hate. The outpouring of support from many of their Serene Meadows neighbors, who now approached them with heartfelt apologies for their previous silence, their complicity, or their indifference, was a tentative but welcome balm to their wounded spirits. Some brought cookies, others offered to help with yard work, one even organized a neighborhood potluck in honor of new beginnings. Daniel, though the memory of the hateful word and the fear it instilled would take a long time to fade, began his slow journey towards healing. For weeks, the sound of any aerosol can, hairspray, air freshener, even whipped cream, would make him jump his eyes, darting nervously. The sight of red spray paint in an art store once triggered a panic attack. Marcus and Olivia found an excellent child psychologist, specializing in trauma. The therapy sessions, both for Daniel individually and for the family as a unit, became a crucial part of their new routine. They learned to talk openly about what had happened, to validate Daniel's fears, and to slowly, patiently help him rebuild his sense of safety and security in his own home, in his own neighborhood. His beloved therapy dog, Max, was an unwavering source of comfort, rarely leaving his side. The legal proceedings against Evelyn Rothschild were closely watched, becoming a local media sensation. The evidence meticulously compiled and presented by the district attorney's office, showcasing the work of Detective Miller and drawing heavily on the expert consultation of Captain Marcus Thorne's division, combined with the now unsealed prior settlement that unequivocally demonstrated her pattern of predatory behavior, proved insurmountable. She was convicted by a jury of her peers of felony malicious vandalism with a hate crime enhancement. Her sentence was severe, a significant prison term, substantial fines, mandatory intensive psychotherapy, and anti-bias training during and after her incarceration, and a permanent restraining order barring her from any contact with the Thorne family or from residing in any community with a homeowners association for a period of 20 years following her release. Her considerable assets were also subject to a successful civil suit brought by the Thorne family for damages related to emotional distress and the profound impact on Daniel's well-being, the proceeds of which they publicly pledged to donate to organizations supporting children with disabilities and combating hate crimes. Serene Meadows Estates, under its new enlightened and far more democratic HOA leadership, underwent a profound and lasting transformation. Educational workshops on diversity inclusion, disability awareness, and conflict resolution became regular community events, often well attended. The HOA bylaws were meticulously rewritten to explicitly prohibit discrimination and harassment in any form, with clear, transparent, and enforceable penalties. The community park, once a place where Daniel's therapy dog had been viewed with suspicion, by some now featured a fully accessible playground and a beautiful sensory garden, funded in part by community donations and a grant secured by the new HOA board. Marcus Thorne, his professional identity now widely and respectfully known throughout the community, became an informal sought-after advisor to the new HOA board on matters of community safety, inclusivity, and ethical governance. He and Olivia, while forever changed by their ordeal, their sense of absolute security irrevocably altered, chose to remain in Serene Meadows. They were committed to helping build the truly supportive, genuinely welcoming community they had originally sought for their son, a community that was now slowly but surely emerging from the wreckage of Ms. Rothschild's hateful legacy. Daniel, surrounded by a neighborhood that now actively celebrated his presence and cherished his unique spirit, continued to thrive. His artistic talents, nurtured by his family and now encouraged by his school and community, blossomed. His gentle soul, though bearing the invisible scars of trauma, remained remarkably resilient, his capacity for joy and wonder largely untouched by the hatred that had briefly but so painfully targeted him. The ugly crimson slur was long gone, replaced by a vibrant mural that served as a daily brilliant reminder to all who saw it that love, acceptance, courage, and the unwavering willingness to confront hatred could indeed transform even the most carefully curated facades of serenity into places of genuine, resilient, and gloriously inclusive beauty.